It was a humid morning in a small-town courthouse, the kind of place where the air conditioning struggled to keep up and the wooden benches creaked under the weight of restless spectators. A 17-year-old black teenager named Aisha Carter stood before the judge, her hands clasped tightly, her expression calm but resolute. The judge, a man known for his sharp tongue and quick judgments, leaned forward with a smirk, tossing out a dismissive comment about her appearance and her chances in his courtroom. The room chuckled, a low ripple of amusement from those who didn't know better. But then Aisha spoke, her voice steady and clear, revealing who she really was. And in that moment, the laughter died and the courtroom fell silent, stunned by the truth she carried. Aisha had been in the system before, not as a defendant but as a name on paperwork, a statistic in reports about foster care and juvenile programs. She was no stranger to courtrooms, but this time was different. She'd been brought in on a minor charge, petty theft, a misunderstanding over a borrowed phone that had spiraled out of control. The police report painted her as just another troubled kid, and the judge, Honorable Raymond Holt, seemed ready to treat her as such. He presided over this courtroom for 2 decades, known for his no-nonsense approach and a tendency to lean hard on defendants he deemed uncooperative. Aisha, with her worn sneakers and quiet demeanor, appeared to be an easy target. The hearing began routinely. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a stack of files, outlined the charge. Aisha had allegedly taken a phone from a classmate without permission. The classmate's parents had pressed charges, and the case had landed on Judge Holt's docket. Aisha's public defender, a young attorney named Sarah Ellis, argued that it was a misunderstanding, that Aisha had intended to return the phone, but the judge wasn't listening. He cut Sarah off mid-sentence, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Miss Carter, do you think you can just walk into my courtroom looking like you do and expect to believe this story?" he said, gesturing at her faded hoodie and braided hair. "You think you're smarter than the rest of us?" The room tittered. A few spectators, locals who frequented hearings for lack of better entertainment, exchanged glances. The prosecutor suppressed a smile. Sarah, visibly frustrated, tried to interject, but Judge Holt waved her off. Aisha stood still, her eyes fixed on the judge, not flinching, not reacting. She'd heard worse, lived through worse. Growing up in foster care, moving from home to home, she'd learned to keep her emotions in check. But she wasn't here to be silent. Not today. "Your Honor," Aisha said, her voice cutting to the lingering chuckles, "I'd like to speak for myself, if I may." Her tone was polite but firm, and it caught the judge off guard. He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Go ahead, Miss Carter," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Enlighten us." Aisha took a deep breath, her hands unclenching slightly. She wasn't nervous, not the way most teenagers would be in her position. She prepared for this moment, not just for this case, but for years, carrying a weight most in the room couldn't imagine. "My name is Aisha Carter," she began, "and I'm not just some kid who made a mistake. I'm the founder of Code for Change, a nonprofit that teaches coding to underserved youth. I've been running it for 2 years, and we've helped over 300 kids in this state alone. I'm also a full-time student with a 4.0 GPA, and I've been accepted to MIT on a full scholarship. I don't say this to brag, Your Honor. I say it because you need to know who I am before you judge me." The room went quiet. The spectators' murmurs stopped. The prosecutor's pen froze mid-note. Even Sarah, who'd been scrambling to keep up with the case, looked at Aisha with wide eyes. Judge Holt's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly. "Is that so?" he said, his tone less confident now. "And what does this have to do with stealing a phone?" "It has everything to do with it," Aisha replied, "because the phone wasn't stolen. It was borrowed as part of a project I was working on with my classmate, Jamal. We were building an app for Code for Change, something to help kids in foster care track their caseworker meetings. Jamal lent me his phone to test the app, but his parents didn't know. When they saw it was gone, they assumed the worst. I tried to explain, but no one listened. Not the school, not the police. And with all due respect, not you, Your Honor." The silence in the courtroom was heavy now, almost suffocating. Judge Holt's face was unreadable, but his fingers tapped lightly on the bench, a sign he was processing her words. The spectators exchanged uneasy glances, some shifting in their seats. Aisha didn't waver. She stood tall, her voice steady as she continued. "I've spent my life proving people wrong," she said. "I grew up in foster care, bounced around 6 homes by the time I was 12. I taught myself to code at 14 using a library computer because I didn't have one of my own. I started Code for Change because I know what it's like to be written off, to be seen as less than, and I'm not going to let a misunderstanding define me." Sarah, recovering from her surprise, jumped in. "Your Honor, I have documentation to support Aisha's statement, letters from her teachers, her MIT acceptance letter, and a statement from Jamal confirming the phone was lent, not stolen." She slid a folder across the table, her hand shaking slightly from the intensity of the moment. The judge took the folder, but didn't open it immediately. His eyes were still on Aisha, studying her. "You expect me to believe all this?" Judge Holt said, though his tone lacked the bite it had earlier. "A 17-year-old running a nonprofit, accepted to MIT? That's quite a story." "It's not a story," Aisha said. "It's my life. And if you don't believe me, you can call my mentor, Dr. Karen Williams, at the community center. She's worked with me for 3 years. Or you can check the website for Code for Change. It's all there, our programs, our impact, our funding. I've got nothing to hide." The prosecutor, now visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, in light of this information, I'd like to request a brief recess to verify the defendant's claims." Judge Holt nodded, his expression still guarded. "Granted," he said. 15 minutes. The courtroom buzzed as the bailiff called for a break. Spectators whispered to each other, some pulling out their phones to search for Code for Change. Aisha sat down, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm but her heart racing. She'd taken a risk speaking out, but she'd had no choice. She wasn't going to let another adult dismiss her, not when she'd worked so hard to build something meaningful. During the recess, Sarah leaned over to Aisha. "Why didn't you tell me about all this?" she asked, her voice a mix of awe and frustration. Aisha shrugged. "Didn't think it would matter," she said. "People see what they want to see. I've been through too many courtrooms to expect different." Meanwhile, the prosecutor's team was busy. They pulled up the Code for Change website, which detailed Aisha's work, workshops, mentorship programs, even a grant from a local tech company. They called Jamal, who confirmed Aisha's story about the phone. They reached Dr. Williams, who spoke glowingly of Aisha's dedication and leadership. By the time the recess ended, the prosecutor's confidence had crumbled. Back in the courtroom, Judge Holt reconvened the session. The prosecutor stood, his tone subdued. "Your Honor, after reviewing the evidence and speaking with complainant's family, we've determined that the charge against Miss Carter was based on a misunderstanding. We move to dismiss the case." The judge nodded, but his eyes were on Aisha. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you, and I was wrong. Your accomplishments are remarkable. This court recognizes that." Aisha nodded, her expression unchanged. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, but there was no triumph in her voice, only resolve. She'd won, but the victory felt hollow. She'd had to bare her soul, expose her achievements, just to be seen as human. It wasn't fair, but it was a reality. The case was dismissed, and the courtroom emptied. A few spectators lingered, wanted to talk to Aisha, but she brushed them off politely. She wasn't here for their approval. She had work to do, kids to teach, an app to finish, a future to build. As she left the courthouse, Sarah walked beside her, still processing what had happened. "You're incredible," Sarah said. "I hope you know that." Aisha smiled faintly. "I know what I'm worth," she said. "Just wish I didn't have to keep proving it." Word spread quickly. Local news picked up the story, not just of the dismissed case, but of Aisha herself, her nonprofit, her scholarship, her resilience. Code for Change saw a surge in donations, enough to fund another year of programs. Aisha didn't let the attention change her. She went back to her classes, her coding, her kids. But she carried the memory of that day in court, not as a triumph, but as a reminder of how far she'd come and how much further she had to go. Judge Holt, for his part, was quieter in the weeks that followed. Colleagues noticed a change in him, a hesitancy where there had once been certainty. He started asking more questions, listening more closely, especially to the young defendants who came before him. He never spoke of Aisha publicly, but those close to him said he kept a clipping of the news story about her on his desk, a quiet reminder the day he'd been wrong. Aisha's story didn't end in that courtroom. She graduated high school at the top of her class and headed to MIT, where she continued her work with Code for Change. She expanded the program, reaching kids across the country, giving them the tools she fought so hard to claim for herself. And though she never forgot the sting of Judge Holt's words, she didn't let them define her. Aisha Carter was more than a moment, more than a case. She was a force, and the world was starting to see it.